All right, final segment this morning with Clint Kelly, malpractice attorney. Let's take another call waited through the break, and it is Tom. Tom, good morning. Hi, Tom.
Good morning, Nick. How are you doing this morning?
Good. How are you, sir? What's on your mind?
I have a question there for Mr. Kelly.
Sure.
You're doing the medical malpractice, but you see if a doctor writes prescriptions and you don't know the doctor and they're writing prescriptions in your name, is that classified as malpractice also?
Well, what do you mean writing prescriptions for someone else in your name?
No, when you had to talk about this a couple months ago,
Yeah.
somebody hacked my telephone.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then
They got my social security number.
yeah.
Well, these doctors had wrote prescriptions in my name and billing my medical and stuff for my stuff that I don't have.
Oh, yeah.
I remember this, Tom, and I think when you called, my best guess was it was either fraud, which is possibility, or there was simply a mistake made that they got patients mixed up. It's not really malpractice because there's no injury to anyone. I mean, you could say that
It's financial injury,
but medical malpractice cases involve physical injury or death. So, in answer your question, no, it would not be medical malpractice.
Yeah. So, and if you feel as though you're still getting burned by that, report it to the police.
Absolutely.
If it's a scam or a fraud and someone's writing something in your name with your social security number, at least get to that. It sounds almost like it could be identity theft.
Exactly.
Yeah, something like that.
That's what we said. Identity theft.
Tom, so I appreciate that. We've got the lines open, but I just wanted to say, is there one more you want to hit on this morning?
Well, there's two of them actually.
Okay.
The one I'm interested in telling people just for personal knowledge is knowing that there are three types of misdiagnosis out there. The most common are cancers, vascular events, which would be heart attacks and strokes, and third is infections, which actually for young people, infection is the most misdiagnosed condition. Meningitis, staph, things like that.
Now, by the way, is a misdiagnosis by itself is not necessarily malpractice. Some things are hard to diagnose.
Correct. The question is whether that misdiagnosis was the product of bad care, a bad decision.
Right.
So if you have a condition where all the red flags are there, either for further investigation or to make the diagnosis, and the physician either ignores the red flags or simply doesn't notice them, that's actionable. That can be a claim for malpractice. That is what I like to call a bad medical mistake.
Yeah.
And if it kills you, or you lose, an arm or a leg, or your brain damage, something like that, then you've got a major injury to attach to the bad medical mistake. There's some cases where there's a misdiagnosis but doesn't harm anybody. They catch it in time to be able to render care, or the injury is fairly limited. Someone who may suffer for a short period of time, but then they get the condition diagnosed and under control. But the reason I'm telling people this is when you go to a hospital, we'll give you an example. If you think that you're having a stroke and you're not diagnosed with a stroke, you don't leave that hospital until you've gotten someone to explain to you, first of all, make sure you had an MRI done, and secondly, explain to you why it's not a stroke.
Okay.
Because you'd be surprised when people go to the hospital and had a stroke and are misdiagnosed that it wasn't a stroke.
What did they say? You just had a dizzy spell?
Dizzy spell, anxiety, sickness. Sometimes they think it's the product of the flu. Don't leave the hospital until stroke is ruled out and you ask why. That's one of those situations where the patient has some control, and your patient advocate, the person that goes in with you, can grab the physician by the by the coat. I'm saying figuratively, but you approach them and say, why is this not a stroke? Explain to me why it's not, or how you ruled it out. And that way you can go home with some comfort knowing that, hey, the doctor knows what he's doing, or this was checked. And they don't mind being challenged like that. No, they really don't.
I would think they'd be glad to explain it at least, put your mind at ease a little bit more. Why? So those are the three. By the way, you said for young people it's infection. You're talking about stuff like staph and
meningitis, bacterial,
things like that.
Right. Those things. Kids can be killed. I think you've heard about this. Kids in college age can die in 24 hours if meningitis is not diagnosed. There's a vaccine they give for this now. But for people who are not vaccinated, if you start having, if you're 18 or 20 and you start having neurological symptoms, your vision gets distorted, or you have trouble walking, or you have a major headache that's the worst headache of your life, that's a situation where you may be developing an infection in your neural system. And if you don't get checked and get treatment quick, you can die from it. Because young people, they don't typically have strokes or heart attacks.
No, right.
And they're
so
usually too young for cancer.
So they're typically more healthy. So it's going to be something like that, an infection of sorts.
Correct.
And doctors should know that.
They should know that. And that's, the thing that's not in this article, and you and I talk about this from time to time, are the wrong body parts being operated on. Or the wrong patient being operated on.
Baffles me.
That's not something that gets discussed very often, but I've told you, I think it's happening with greater regularity because the volume of patients is going higher and the supply of the doctors is basically remaining stable, if not going down. And when you put those two things together, the margin for error shrinks down to just about nothing.
All right. As we wrap things up here, want to remind folks again, we talked about the fact standard of care has to be looked at. Statute of limitations, don't take time calling it in.
Correct.
Okay, make sure you move on something like that. And are there any others, I'm just wondering, I know there's class action cases that maybe once in a while you've been part of, but any other things that you've seen coming through your door lately? Lower back pain, surgeries like that, back surgeries, is that?
I always get back surgery cases.
Okay, or artificial
call
joints.
Me from those and joints, and I usually don't take those cases. And let me tell you why. When it comes to joint implants, there's a lot of leeway given to surgeons as to how they're installed, and there's not always a success rate with that. And so there can be times where those replacements either get infected or they have to be done again. And unless there's just some real dramatically bad medical decision made, using the wrong hardware, where it can't be fixed.
Replacing the wrong knee.
Correct. Or it leads to an amputation.
Okay.
All right, those are cases that I take because that's the kind of case that a jury could look at and say, hey, something went wrong here. We're willing to give the patient the benefit of the doubt here. With back surgery, that's another kind of surgery where there's a lot of leeway given to back surgeons because the results, again, are not always successful. In fact, in some situations, the prognosis is 50-50. And people sometimes have to have repeated procedures to get to the bottom of the nerve root issue or whatever's causing their back issues. Unless that leads to paralysis or an inability to walk, again, I don't take those cases because juries don't really get interested unless somebody's being wheeled into a courtroom.
Right.
Does that make sense to you?
No, it absolutely does. And the visual of it, and again, in those cases too, they can follow the standard of care, and a bad result is not a sign of malpractice.
That's correct. I always have to remember you can have bad outcomes, but my job is to separate the bad outcomes from the bad medical care.
Right.
And again, we've said this before, Nick, there's such a thing as a medical mistake and a bad medical mistake.
Right.
The medical mistakes, generally, I don't take those cases because they're defensible. Everybody makes mistakes. It's the bad medical mistakes, those are the cases I take because those are the ones that are hard to defend if you're a physician or nurse.
Yeah, and the other part of it is sometimes you'll have a case where you'll tell a client, yes, you were done wrong here.
Correct.
But I can't take your case, not because of statute of limitations, but because you've recovered. Or, or there's just not, frankly, the money in it to justify filing this lawsuit because it costs you to prosecute, or rather to sue, right? I mean, where you'll call someone and say, look, there's no denying you messed up, but fortunately you've recovered. And while you went through some pain and suffering for a brief period of time, it's not worth the lawsuit.
And that's good.
Yeah, right.
That's good. That's the best outcome for the patient. You don't want a lawsuit. You want to make a full recovery.
Right.
So that's a good thing for you. I spend all the money on the lawsuits. The patient spends nothing. The patient pays nothing. They just get money if I collect for them.
Right.
So I'll spend $50,000 to $100,000 getting a case to trial. If the case is only worth $50,000 in damages, it doesn't make economic sense to take it.
You're not going to be a lawyer for long taking cases
can't.
like that.
And it's unfortunate, but that's the way the system is built right now. Until it changes, the people with the injuries that are up to 100,000 or 150, unless it's something that's very, very simple to handle, you just can't take them.
Right. The bottom line is you have to make a living as well. You have to take them on, and you spend a lot of it. But I'm glad you mentioned this. It's still interesting to me that there are people out there that don't actually realize it. And for a lot of lawyers, you get paid if you win. They don't have to pay you up front.
Correct. They don't pay
so
anything.
you don't pay anything. So that's why when you make a call to Clint's office, and we'll have the number up there again, part of that is the consultation. And if he takes your case, it's not like, well, because a lot of these people are going to say, I don't have any money to hire a lawyer. I'm racked up in bed
You don't have to pay anything. I mean, if there's one thing you need to remember from this show is you don't pay anything, and the call is completely confidential. I mean, you just, it's really a poor decision on your part not to pick up the phone and call if you think that you've been a victim of medical neglect and you've got serious harm, because you've got a long life to live.
Yep.
And that's the one thing about a major injury from medical neglect or medical malpractice, it could lead to a lifetime of misery.
Yep. Hey, let's put the number up there and the location. Again, Clint, your office I've been out to before in Hendersonville.
Yep.
Over there on East Main.
East Main Street, and of course I take cases all throughout Tennessee, and Southern Kentucky.
Right.
I handle cases in Southern Kentucky as well. You can reach me at 615-8-MILLION. That's 800-0000, so it's pretty easy to remember, 615-8-MILLION. The call's free, the call's confidential. You'll have someone to talk to at the office to do an intake or a history. I promise I will evaluate that history. I will call you if I believe your case has merit, and I will contact you or write you if I think your case does not have merit, and I will explain why, because some lawyers, in fact a lot of lawyers don't do that. They won't tell the client why they can't take the case.
They just
I
reject
will.
it and say no.
Well, part of my job, and I think part of the responsibility of a board-certified medical malpractice lawyer, is to give answers to questions. What good am I if I'm not answering questions?
Right. Well, yeah, because the person's going to wonder why. Why was I? And we've heard that. We've had people call in and said that they were denied and they didn't know why. And I think just that's good business to do it that way. And you do some federal on occasion.
I
right?
do federal cases as well. I do federal and state cases. As long as it's medical malpractice or hospital malpractice, something that involves bad health care, I can take the case.
That's his specialty. It is all he does. That and comes on MorningLine. Clint.
Good to see you again.
Thank you for coming on. Listen, we'll see you again in a month, my friend.
You'll never think of Neil Armstrong the same way again, will you?
If it happened to him, it can happen to anyone, right? Thanks, Clint. We'll be right back. I'll wrap things up right after this.